Well, looking back on my early career, there are several things I wish I'd known then which I know now. And I'm sure in 10 years' time I'll say the same about what I know now. We're always learning new things. But I think one of the things I'd wish I'd known was to treat fashions and trends in pedagogy with a little bit more cynicism, a little bit more circumspection, with a bit more caution. Because I remember when I was being trained as a teacher, the communicative language teaching method was all the rage. And we were told things like, oh, you don't need to teach grammar, you just focus on communication. And so I took that and I believed it because it came from my lecturers and some of the articles I read. And when I went to China, I went out with this method and I found my students were very dependent upon grammar. Probably more so than I would have liked, but our styles of teaching didn't match. And I wish I'd been quicker in realizing that there are many, many, many different ways to learn a language, that there's no such thing as the super method. There is no single way of doing it. There are actually many, many different ways of achieving what you want to achieve. And different methods can be used in different situations. So there are times when a strong dose of grammar teaching can be extremely useful. There are other times when a big focus on communication can be very helpful for the students' learning. It's a question of knowing that you have a range of possibilities and then having more and more wisdom as to when you use which specific strategy in which circumstances. That's something I wish I'd known when I was younger. It would have saved me a lot of soul searching. It would have saved me a lot of disastrous lessons. And I think one way of avoiding that kind of thing is to use colleagues. I remember going back to my early days when I was teaching in Wales. I had one lesson I prepared and it was an utter failure, a total disaster. And I was very upset about it. I mean, it was so bad, the discipline in the class, that they were throwing paper aeroplanes across the class in my lesson. And I just didn't have the skills to control the lesson and to keep the noise levels down and so on. And I thought, yeah, what a failure. I'm a failure. I have to give up teaching and so on and so forth. But a very sympathetic teacher in the classroom said, oh, what's up? You're looking a bit gloomy, a bit sad. And I said, yeah, I just had a terrible lesson. He said, don't we all? Tell me about it. And I found it very, very valuable to talk to him. And we talked it through. And he said, well, the first thing you do, and this is very valuable advice, which I always try to bear in mind, he said, move it from your heart to your head. First of all, don't get emotional about it because everybody has a bad lesson. Just think about what went wrong, what were the causes. Think of 3 things that you would avoid doing in the future, and 3 things that you would do in the future. He said, that's my rule of thumb for a bad lesson. 3 things I'll eliminate and 3 things I'll improve in the future. And we talked it through and he said, well, one of the things you did was maybe you didn't communicate clearly the ideas of the lesson, so the students might not have understood what they were expected to do. You moved too quickly to student-based activities, in that they hadn't received enough instruction in the task. They didn't have the language, it was a French lesson, they didn't have enough French to be able to manage the activity that they were doing. You didn't give enough demonstrations. You probably went too quickly, and that's why they felt a little bit lost. They felt unsure, so they became disruptive. He said the other thing you should do is, when you look at your lesson plan, don't just write it from a teacher's perspective. Look at your lesson plan from a student's perspective. Imagine you're a student in your own class and you're receiving this lesson. Just spend 5 minutes just visualizing the lesson from their perspective before you give it. So do your lesson plan, but look at it from a student perspective. He said you'll find all kinds of things. For example, he said in your lesson plan, there's about 20 minutes here where you're focusing on individual students. You're asking individual students to come to the front and to act out something. Well, what are the other 39 students doing at that particular moment? You haven't actually specified or given them an activity. As they're watching, they should be doing what? So really, you're just playing to an audience of 1 instead of an audience of 40. And I think that was very good advice. So first of all, see things from the student perspective and plan your lessons better. Second thing, don't take it to heart. We all have bad lessons. And then the third thing is use a network of sympathetic colleagues when things go wrong.